Hi, I'm Ashley Smith, and welcome to Nature in the Hills. Today with us is Charles Durbin, our beekeeper here at the Farmington Hills Nature Center. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in beekeeping?
I'm currently an engineer with Hitachi up here on the hill just
Right.
above here. So I've been there for about 8 years. And what got me started in beekeeping? I don't really know exactly. Maybe it was just something to do. I also have a garden at home, and I thought bees would be a good idea, so I just started doing it.
Right.
So nothing in particular. But,
Okay.
But yeah.
So how long have you been doing beekeeping?
I've been doing it for about 4 years now,
Okay.
maybe a little bit longer.
Okay.
So I've been using this type of hive since, so this type of hive's a little bit different, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that later on too, but
Okay.
before we get into the kind of hive that we have here at the Nature Center, maybe you could share with us some of your favorite parts about being a beekeeper and maybe
Okay.
the most challenging parts, because I know it's a lot of work.
The most challenging part's probably the easiest one to answer. The most challenging part's to get them to survive
Right.
at least 1 year. They have a tendency to die out quickly. And there's a lot of reasons out there for that. Everything from what many people may have heard of as colony collapse disorder to other types of parasites and bugs and
Right. There's
and
a lot
what
of
have you.
challenges that the bees face.
Yeah, it's really challenges that the bees face, not that the beekeeper faces. The beekeeper faces in trying to keep them alive. but
Right.
It's actually a challenge for the bees to stay alive.
Right.
So.
Do you have a rewarding part or a part that you would consider your most favorite?
Yeah, when I get to see a really strong hive, and they do a phenomenon called bearding on
Right.
the hive. Maybe you've
So
seen
cool.
that.
Yeah,
It's when
they've
they
done
come
that
out of
here
the
at our hive.
And they cover the outside of the hive, and you just know that that's a really, really nice, strong hive because of that. They're coming out to cool off, but it's just a really nice phenomenon to see the bees do
Right.
it.
So
when
you
they
see
cover
that a
the
lot
hives.
more of like in the middle of the summer when the
Middle of
temperatures
summer,
get pretty high.
Temperatures get warm, yes.
Right.
So a bunch of them will come out and they'll just gather around the entrance, and it makes like you would think of a beard.
A man's beard, yeah.
A man's beard on the
It
hive.
looks
so,
exactly like that
yeah.
too. And a lot of people, I think, when they consider bees or other pollinators like
Mm-hmm.
wasps and hornets, they kind of get a little scared. You know, they think, oh,
Yeah.
bees are dangerous, something that I might be allergic to. When they see things like bearding or they
Right.
hear about swarming, they get a little
They're
frightened.
misunderstood a lot. These types of bees, honeybees, are misunderstood a lot. They're very docile creatures, but they do have a stinger, and almost everybody is allergic at one level or another.
Most
Only
people are pretty mildly.
Most people are
right.
mildly allergic.
A little bump and it itches a little.
Yeah,
and
that's still an allergic reaction. There are a few people in the population who have a very strong allergic reaction. I believe they call it anaphylactic shock. They can go into. So that's a dangerous situation, but it's a very limited amount of the population.
Right.
Being stung, having the itching or the swelling or the red mark, or you can even swallow a
Raise.
whole hand up. That's a normal
Typical.
allergic response. It's not life-threatening.
Right.
However, bees themselves, again, are very docile.
Sure.
They differ from a wasp because a wasp is a little more aggressive. And a wasp, the major difference between a wasp and a honeybee is once a honeybee stings, they lose their stinger. They only can sting once.
Right. So they don't sting all the time, only when they're feeling
No.
threatened and
Well, only
a
when
way
they're
of
feeling
defense.
threatened. They know that it's a life-threatening
life.
thing to them. It ends their life when they sting. They
Sure.
know that. So they only use stinging as a last resort. A wasp will sting and sting and sting and sting. Just one wasp can sting you many times, and they're just a little more aggressive.
Right.
But then again, they don't have the colony of a hive like this one does. They're
Sure.
a little bit different.
A little different
Yeah,
behavior.
a little different behavior.
Right.
But bees themselves, honeybees, are very docile creatures.
And I mean, I can speak from experience with that just in helping you with some of
Right,
your beekeeping
right.
tasks, you know, going out and opening our hive without any protective equipment and at the same time not feeling threatened in any way
Yes,
and just
yes,
kind of
and-
watching the behavior of the bees. So I think that's important for people to understand,
Right.
you know, not to be frightened.
There's nothing to be frightened
Right.
of. that is a personal preference I made when I work my hives without protective equipment. It doesn't mean I don't have the protective equipment.
Sure.
I do have it. I just made a personal choice when I started beekeeping not to use it. I know it can be done without the protective equipment. Again, the bees are docile. The reason why I did it and I worked my hive without the protective equipment is because I wanted to do this and not be afraid of the bees. If I'm afraid of the bees, they'll sense it,
right,
and it'll be an issue, and then I will have something to worry about. But so long as I'm not afraid, and it's a challenge to do it that way, but as you've seen and you've helped me many times, they're very docile.
right,
As long as you move slowly and you're careful, and they don't mind that you work the hive at all.
It's pretty incredible, and I think you do
Yeah.
a good job of sharing that with other people, making them feel comfortable around the bees.
I hope so, because I would like everybody to be more comfortable with the bees. You know, there are a lot of ordinances around, whether it be city, county, or state, or what have you, that have really got a negative outlook on bees, unfortunately. So it would be a lot nicer if everybody learned more about them,
right,
and then would welcome them more.
So speaking of that, why are bees important and other pollinators? Why are they important to us?
That's the standard answer for that is that they're important because of our food crops.
Sure.
But the thing that people often forget, bees are not indigenous to this area of the world. Honeybees are not indigenous to this area of the world. Humans have been in the North Americas or the Americas for a very, very long time without the presence of honeybees here. So honeybees, as far as their importance, is for the agricultural crops that they are currently being used for.
Right, pollinating our crops.
Pollinating some crops like the almonds or the apples or things like this. But it's honestly, and it's part of the problem, is it comes down to the dollar. Then they're important for the economy more than they are important for our survival.
Because we have other native pollinators
We have
here
other
in
native
Michigan,
pollinators,
not honeybees.
that's right. We just don't have the ability to move them around from location to location. So that's the big difference there.
You can't control them as much.
Yeah, but you know what? It's that very moving around that's causing all the problems with honeybees, really.
Sure.
Shipping them from the south, like Florida and Georgia, to California to pollinate the almond trees, back to Michigan to pollinate apple trees, for example, and then back to Georgia. They have a tendency to never get acclimatized to a certain area. They never build a strength for a certain area. And that's, a lot of beekeepers feel that that's the main reason the honeybees are having such a hard time surviving.
Right. Well, there's very few animals that can adapt that quickly. So,
humans can,
right.
usually, but they're about it. Almost all animals have difficulty adapting that quickly.
Right. So it's hard, it's not, I mean, for us to expect them to adapt that quickly is kind of too much to expect from the bees.
I think so.
And I think, you know, when we talked about wasps and hornets and even hummingbirds, other pollen butterflies, it's important to realize that those insects are just as important in birds to pollinating our native wildflowers and even our crops too. So it's not all the honeybees' job, even though we often attribute it to them. So when we talk about pollination, we know that the bees are going out in search of food and in the process collecting pollen and drinking nectar from the plants. So I guess, can you walk us through the process of how the bees make honey and why they do it?
Yeah. I guess it's fair to say they make honey.
Right.
In a way, what they're doing is they fly out and they collect nectar from the flowers, the sweet sugary juice that's in the flower, and they bring it back to the hive. They first collect it and they put it in a stomach in their body. They fly back to the hive and it's kind of gross, but they regurgitate it. They spit it back up into the hive, and then the rest of the bees in the hive will drive the water out of it until it becomes very thick and syrupy.
Okay.
And that's what we call honey.
Almost like maple sugaring when you boil down the sap into
yes, in a way.
maple syrup.
Like maple sugaring. Yeah, absolutely. So it's not like milk from a cow.
Sure.
The cow makes milk. Bees collect the nectar and then just dry it out.
Sure,
so it actually, when you have honey, you're actually eating flour.
Right, like concentrated.
Yeah. The big difference is that it also contains enzymes and other things from the bee, though.
Okay.
From them spitting it back out.
Right, it's been in their body.
Right, so
Which
it's
is kinda,
actually very beneficial for
right,
humans.
it's pretty incredible to think about that too. And
Yeah.
you know, in the process of them collecting nectar and turning it into honey in the hives, I know they use that as a food source for themselves too, and to
Right.
feed their young, not just for
Right.
us to harvest and use in our own ways. But they also collect pollen too. I know
Yes,
they have
that's
the
the
little
other major source.
hairs on their body. So can you talk a little
Exactly.
bit about that too?
The bees have hairy kind of legs, as you've seen,
Right.
and on their back legs especially, when they're flying from flower to flower, they're basically looking for one of three things. They're looking for nectar to make honey, they're looking for pollen, which is a protein source for the bees, and propolis, which the bees use to essentially glue the parts of the hive together. If you were to open this up and break this joint here, it would actually make a popping noise, because that's how they bind everything in the hive together.
Right.
The propolis also serves an antibiotic property within the hive, which helps keep out disease. I don't know if I ever explained that to you as
Right,
well. But,
yeah. It's pretty incredible how they can keep the hive so clean and orderly, and
right,
how they keep it functioning.
They are very clean creatures, insects, if you will. They will do everything as far as cleaning the wax, to removing the dead bees, to even keeping out invaders. So yeah. Oh, the other part I forgot to explain was where the wax comes from.
Right.
The wax is not collected outside of the hive. It's actually made by the bees.
Oh, wow.
So it's actually, they have some glands on their bodies that they sweat, sort of sweat,
Bee sweat.
kind of in a way, the wax, and they collect it in sheets, and then they build the honeycomb from
Wow.
it. So
And it
that
is-
is actually made from the bees.
Wow, and it's pretty amazing to watch them in the hive making
Yeah.
the comb and measuring it
Right,
out. And
right.
we share with folks that the bees have all different jobs in the hive and what they
Right.
do, and then when they all work together to form the honeycomb. So can you just briefly describe some of the different
Right.
jobs the bees have and how they form the comb?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, with this particular one at this time of year, all we're seeing in here is the older wax.
Right.
The new wax, which is just absolutely beautiful, is just this ghostly white color. It is just amazingly beautiful when they first make it. But what they'll do is they'll create a kind of like a bee chain, where they'll all hang on to each other, and they'll kind of make a loop down
Legs are all
like this,
connected, right.
and they'll just hang down. And then a lot of people think that that's they're measuring out the shape for the comb as it drops. And then they'll start building at the top, and they'll build down
Work their way down.
and work their way down. And they make a couple of different sizes of comb. This particular one here, the smaller one, is for worker bees. And then occasionally you'll see a much larger piece of comb where the hole in it is much larger. And those are for the drones. So we haven't talked about the different types of bees that are in the
So,
hive
I mean, I
either,
know the
so-
worker bees are all the females, and they
Right.
are the ones that actually leave the hive in search of
Right.
the flowers, correct?
Right, that's correct. That is very correct. The worker bees comprise probably 80–90% of the hive, and they're all females. Of course, the queen is also a female.
Right.
Only the drones are males. The drones, towards the end of the summer, towards autumn and going into winter, usually get kicked out of the hive at
Yeah.
that time, and then they're on their own and they usually die. But that's not
Very
such a
dramatic.
bad thing. It's very dramatic, but it's not such a bad thing when you understand that the average life of a bee is just over a month.
Right.
So it's another thing that makes it hard for them to adapt. They don't live very long for a single bee.
Learning and passing on that learned behavior is more
Right,
difficult for
right.
them.
The only one that lives an extended period of time is the queen. The queen will live a couple of years,
Okay.
but then even she must be replaced.
And so we also share with folks that the queen is the one that pretty much produces all of the bees in the
Yeah,
hive.
that's right.
The drones take care of those larvae in the hive,
Right.
correct?
Right.
Okay.
Well, the worker bees and the drones take care of the larvae. The queen, there's only one in a hive at a time. She will lay all the eggs, up to 1,000 eggs a day. And the worker bees, they go through different stages of life, from caring for the young, to building comb, to finally later in life collecting nectar. And by the time they're done collecting nectar, they usually die off.
Okay.
But yeah, they all have their purpose. And then the drones, which is a small fraction only during the summer months, mainly serve one purpose, and that is, well, two purposes. They take care of they do take a part in taking care of the young, but their other main purpose is to fly out in a meeting area where they'll meet other queens to mate with that queen, and then they die as soon as
Wow.
they mate.
Wow, that is
So
incredible.
that's their major purpose in life,
Right.
is to mate with a foreign queen, not this queen.
Mm-hmm.
So this queen doesn't mate with these drones, she mates with other bees.
Right. Well, how amazing it would be to know your purpose in life that easy in the
they-
beehive.
yeah, really.
We often tell visitors that it is pretty dramatic in there. It's almost like watching a soap opera unfold, all of the different activities that the bees do inside the hive. So it's pretty incredible. So speaking of visitors at the Nature Centers, when visitors come, they can expect to check out our observation hive that we're sitting in front of here. And so you have multiple hives that you take care of, some on your property, and including this one here at the Nature Center. So can you describe a little bit about what kind of hive this is and how it's different from maybe traditional hives that we think of?
Sure. This hive's actually, this style of hive is actually very old. This style of hive is called a Warre hive. There's many different styles of hives out there. This style of hive was developed by a French monk, maybe in the late 1800s, early 1900s. His name was Emile Warre, W-A-R-R-E. He wrote a book called Beekeeping for All. It is available for free download on the internet for anyone who's interested. It's a great book. It tells you everything you really need to know about keeping bees, and it's free.
Great.
So it's great reading. But this particular hive it differs in one way from a normal Warre hive by these windows.
Sure.
So these windows were put in so that people could see inside the hive.
It's great. You can see from all the different angles inside
from the
of there.
different angles, right, exactly. And these bees exit the building through a tube on the back, and they go outside. So they are able to go outside and collect from flowers and what have you.
Right.
My hives at my house are identical, except no windows.
Okay, so another way that we talked about that they're different too is a lot of times this is kind of a self-contained, they don't require maybe quite as much maintenance, or you don't really maintain them as much as you would a traditional hive.
The methodology that was used by Emile Warre was a hands-off approach, which is quite a bit different from industrial beekeeping, so to speak, that uses what's known as a Langstroth hive. A Langstroth hive uses frames which these combs inside would be attached to a board and a box around it, and then they can take the frame in and out.
Okay.
The purpose of taking it in and out is to examine the comb and the bees and check for different things, see how well the bees are doing, or check for infections or anything like that, and put it back. Move it from here to another hive, mix them up. There's a lot of reasons they do it. This particular style of hive is a hands-off approach. You essentially need to check it 2, maybe 3 times a year, and that's it. So the idea here is to let the bees alone, let them do what they do best. A lot of people have grief with that. I should say a lot of beekeepers, professional beekeepers, have grief with it because they feel that if there's a disease in here, then what is keeping that disease from spreading to their hives, for instance. The argument against that is, so long as the beekeeper knows what they're doing, they'll know if there's a disease in here or not. You don't even have to have these windows. You can just watch the entrance. So if you see strong activity at the entrance, you see them bearding in the summer when it's nice and warm, there's no worry of disease inside the hive. That's one of Emile Warre's principles. Watch the entrance, and it'll tell you the health of the hive.
You shouldn't have to be so intrusive to figure it out. And really, that is true. I mean, just the little that the Nature Center staff works with you and knows about the bees here, we can really sense how the bees are doing just by watching. Well, we can watch what they're doing inside, but just even watching them coming and going out of the exit tells us a lot about the inside.
And Emile Warre had another principle of, if the hive is weak for any reason, destroy the hive. Now that seems very cruel.
Right.
Whereas an industrial beekeeper will do everything they can to keep it alive. They will try putting chemicals in there, everything from antibiotics to other chemicals to get rid of mites and what have you like that. Emile Warre would say, don't do any of that. You only make the bees weaker. And it's a very key point, because if you make life hard for an organism, the organism has 2 choices: survive or die. If we put something in this hive to help the bees, who are we making life hard for? Are we making it hard for the bees or the invader?
Right.
We're making it hard for the invader.
So we're strengthening the invader.
So we're strengthening the invader instead of strengthening the bees.
Right.
So that's the principle behind this. It's a rough life, but they need to survive on their own.
Right.
If they don't survive on their own, we just keep making bees weaker and weaker and weaker.
Right, and that probably is the root cause of a lot of the problems going on with bees right now. A lot of the talk about it.
A lot of people think so.
Right, and I think, you know, it goes back to that, you mentioned the survival of the fittest, and we've had our share of trials and tribulations here with our bees having different invaders and things. And, you know, I think it's interesting to be able to share that with visitors, and so that they understand all of the challenges that bees face, and that even though they are something that we consider part of our natural environment, that they have a lot of things that they need to survive, and that's built in to make them a lot stronger. So it's pretty incredible. And going back to that, I guess, you know, you said you've been doing beekeeping for a number of years, and it sounds like you've studied a lot of history of beekeeping. So how do you think beekeeping has changed over the years since you first began?
Well, since I first began, it's becoming more open as far as the average person keeping beehives. It used to be only industrial beekeepers would keep bees.
Right.
But lately, we're seeing a lot of the individual people, whether legally or illegally, keeping hives, which is rather nice. And a lot of municipalities and governments around are starting to open up to the idea that anybody can keep bees. So there are places around where bees are, you know, showing up in the backyards of people's homes on hives, which is actually excellent. I mean, that's another principle that helps the bees become strong. You need to increase the population of bees in order for them, the ones that are going to die, and the ones that are going to live.
Right, make it more diverse too.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that goes back to a lot of the movement to become more local and to move back to our roots and be able to produce our own types of foods, from a garden to a beehive to maple sugaring.
There's no reason we shouldn't be responsible for our own food. We shouldn't have to rely on the industry to provide it for us.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time for that, I think, and I think there's a lot of people that are even more interested in bees, even within the last 5 years. So why is it important for folks to learn more about bees, and what are some things that folks can do to help bees?
The best thing they can do to help the bees is get a hive.
Right.
Just, get a hive and leave them alone. That's basically it. But the other thing is become educated about them, because there are plenty of examples on the internet of people destroying bees, honeybees, whether it be with wasp killer or whatever that happen to be around their home, not realizing that they are very beneficial creatures. So become more educated, know that they're not a threat, and then leave them alone, and they will be just fine.
You mentioned legal or illegally having beehives, so can you explain a little bit about that? Are there permitting processes that people have to go through to get a hive on their property?
Some states there are, some locations there are. You do need, whether it be a permit from a local government to have a beehive, to locations where you don't need anything.
Okay.
There are some states that have a restriction against this type of hive, actually, believe it or not, because this hive uses what's known as a fixed top bar type hive, a vertical fixed top bar. Some states forbid this type of hive, and the reason why is because there's a state bee inspector. I don't know if you knew that as well. Michigan even has a state bee inspector that's supposed to go around and do inspections on these industrial bees. And the way they do their inspections is to open up the hive and remove the frame and take a look at the bees.
So they're not really able to do that with these hives.
They're not really able to do that here, and they don't understand how this hive works, so they can't inspect it.
Right.
So it becomes a problem in some states. However, Michigan allows this hive.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad, and I think that goes back to how bees are part of our economy, and that kind of all comes together, right? So another way that we have talked about here, helping out our bees, is installing a pollinator garden.
Absolutely.
And so some of what that entails is planting native wildflowers and plants that would attract the bees and provide more food for them. Kind of, reducing some of those challenges that the bees might face. One of those is finding food.
That's actually a good way to help bees out. Instead of putting chemicals in the hive, provide them a diverse food source.
Right.
So that's actually much better. We live in such a monoculture society as far as food sources go. It's much much more beneficial to provide them a diverse food source than it is to put chemicals in the hive.
Right, and not only would a pollinator garden attract honeybees, but it would also attract desirable pollinators like butterflies and hummingbirds.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
other birds that would come and want to eat the seeds and things like that from the flowers. So I think it's all around beneficial, and I know folks are moving a lot towards planting native plants, and they do well in Michigan. So we're going to be installing a native pollinator garden here at the Nature Center soon, so folks can look forward to that and be able to see how that's impacting the bees too.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, I do too. I'm excited about it as well. But so can you talk a little bit about some other products that we can produce from honey or from beehives?
Yeah, sure. There's actually a lot in the beehive, like most things in life, can actually be used for more than one reasons. We don't just get honey out of here. The wax can be used, melted down and refined and made into candles. Candles made from bee wax actually will burn without soot, unlike other products. So they're actually extremely beneficial and extremely efficient for making candles. The pollen is sometimes collected and used for medicinal purposes. It's collected in the cells as well. And the honey itself can be used for a lot of different things. You can make alcoholic products out of it, mead. You can ferment it and it makes a honey wine. There's a lot of companies out there now that make honey wine, so it's a very delicious product. The other thing that you can get just in general from the hive is if a person's allergic in an area to a certain flower, if they eat honey from the same area where the bees have collected the pollen from that area, over a period of time, the person will become immune to that allergy of that flower or plant. So that's another benefit of consuming honey from a
I've definitely heard that before about helping with allergies. I know we have some other volunteers that will produce products that we sell here at the Nature Center, like soap from beeswax and lip balm. So just the natural smell, the beeswax smell is it's so inviting and just fresh. And so I like the products that she makes as well. So there's a lot of things that just the few things that you mentioned, plus a lot more that we can use beehives for.
Absolutely.
So do you have, since you've been doing beekeeping for a few years now and helping us so much here at the Nature Center and having our hive that folks can come and learn more about bees and enjoy, do you have a favorite bee story that you want to share, or something that's happened to you or experience that you've had over the years?
It's been a good experience.
That's good.
With the exception of in the spring, opening up a hive right after a winter and finding the whole place dead, which happens.
Right.
But one of the most enjoyable things I do with the beehive is when I install a new package, there's nothing quite like dumping 15,000 bees into a new hive, literally just dumping them in there without protective equipment that just
kind of exhilarating.
So it's kind of a pleasure to do, and it seems so dangerous, but actually it's not. So it's just fun.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. We've been here when we've had bees introduced to our hive, and it's just
you
crazy.
Only do that when you're installing new bees.
And like we said, we've had some of our own issues with our hives here, but it is a learning experience for us and our visitors, and that is a really exciting time to see that many bees in one place and to learn that there's one queen in there somewhere that is hard to spot, and that how they introduce her into the hive and how the whole hive works. So, but thank you so much for coming on today and sharing a little bit more about how bees are important and how they work too.
I appreciate it. Thanks
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Nature in the Hills. To learn more about bees, you can visit the Nature Center or give us a call anytime.